And welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. I'm your host, Shawn Rosemarin, and today we're exploring one of the most pivotal transformations in enterprise leadership, the evolving role of the CIO and the CTO. And I could think of no better guest to bring in than a long-term friend and colleague, now actually doing consulting, extensive consulting, with CIOs and CTOs around the world. So it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Lewis. Paul, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Hello, hello. Happy to be here. Always fun conversation with Mr. Rosemarin. I'm Paul Lewis. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Pythian. We are a 30-year young data services and AI organization, and I certainly spend a good portion of my time. I at least have 100 individual CIO and CTO and CISO conversations every quarter. So I have a deep appreciation for what they're thinking at the moment.
Now, Paul, I was going to make a joke about us having a pithy conversation, given that you worked for Pythian, but you corrected me yesterday saying the name actually has no connection to pithy. So we're going to use it anyways. But
Fair enough.
why don't you help connect the dots since we will undoubtedly have an audience that wants to know where the name came from. So let's jump into mythology and help folks out.
Sure. Most people say, "Are you a Python company?" Because I can see where they make that leap. Whereas Pythian is based on Pythia, who is the high priestess to the Oracle of Delphi, right? We were an Oracle services company for a good chunk of that 30 years, and now we manage 27,000 databases and 43 technologies in 2,000 environments across 180 countries, right? It's a pretty wide spectrum data sort of platform.
Wow. All right. So, with the Pythian and the pithy joke behind us, let's kind of jump into our conversation. Right. I mean, it feels as though this will probably air sometime around the end of the year as we're getting ready to enter 2026.
Hmm.
We've had quite a year of change. But I want to just take folks on a bit of a journey here. I mean, not long ago, the CIO and CTOs, I can remember a statement maybe a decade or two ago that said that, if IT didn't understand the business, that IT was doomed. We almost seem to have gone full circle now to where if the business doesn't understand IT, then the business is doomed. And a lot of that falls on these CTO, CIO, CISO titles who are mainly seen as the guardians of everything IT, which originally might have started with keeping systems running, managing costs, ensuring uptime. But today the roles changed. I mean, today the organization and the boards are looking for these folks to really be the strategic visionaries, the innovation catalysts, the revenue drivers, and obviously a ton of organizational transformation. um, Paul, why don't we fill it in? I mean, look, this has got to be one of the most transformative roles in the company, but also some of the most complex. Where do we start?
And it would be a mistake to refer to it as a change because the reality is it's incremental. Like CIs are still responsible for blinking lights in the data center, red, green, yellow projects. It's not like that went away. That's still their responsibility, right? They have hundreds, if not thousands, of people in IT that are delivering projects. But now it's the new expectation of this role, right? This new expectation of the role is to say you need to sit at the organizational decision making. I need to be involved in corporate development conversations, who we buy, who buys us, growth conversations, right? Where are we going to create new products and what geography should we enter and what kind of new customer segments are important? In fact, the CIO is in many ways responsible for the business model of the organization. But more importantly, if this business model changes over time, what's the net impact to the organization? Because as you know, all of these organizations run on the technologies that serve them. It might be a CRM, it might be an ERP, it might be a data platform, but all of these couldn't survive, or at least logistically, without the systems, and therefore their participation at that level becomes mandatory. It's not an option. It's not get your orders from CIO, from CFO. It's be at the decision making table and make the actual decision.
So let's jump inside the mind of these roles a little bit. So if you're sitting at that table and you're listening to what the business is doing, how are they thinking about where we are right now? I mean, really, what's the top of mind of a CIO, CTO? And maybe you can even evolve from that to what's scaring them the most.
So one of the big asks of a CIO, especially from an executive leadership, maybe even the CEO directly, is tell me about the market dynamics of both the competitors and sort of technology at large, right? Because they hear and desire artificial intelligence. They hear and desire cloud. They hear and desire quantum, right? They hear and desire things that they read in the airplane and they want to make real. So now the CIO sort of brings the market dynamics presentation together, puts it in front of those executives, and now the CEO wants to know what's the next step. Great. AI is important. AI is innovative. AI will change the way we do business. What's the roadmap? What's the money you need? And more importantly, what are the how much money do you need? Who gets to make that decision? And then if I have 52 cards, where am I dealing it? Where's the best use cases, biggest bang for the buck? And the biggest fear for a CIO right now is not understanding it, not actually appreciating the technology, not knowing what the risks are, because it's one of the more academically complex subjects as compared to cloud, as compared to storage, as compared to compute, right? It is requires a skill set that isn't naturally formed in IT.
Well, that's interesting. So let's dive in. I mean, we couldn't have a conversation. You talked about every board asking about AI. You talked about the transformative aspects. There's obviously a market cap aspect, right? The more you can talk about AI, the more you can mention AI in your future plans, the potential higher multiple the market will give you.
Yeah.
Um, but then you mentioned this is really confusing and misunderstood. So jump in. I'm dying to know more. What are your thoughts there?
So there are two AI races. There's the race of the Magnificent Seven, the technology companies, insert hyperscalers, insert OpenAI, insert NVIDIA, who are not leading edge, not bleeding edge, but a decade ahead of enterprise. Then there's the race of the enterprise, right? What can I do with the technologies in front of me to apply to my business? But as you know, since you've been in this world long enough, the impediment of innovation in any organization is organizational friction, right? There's always a form to fill. There's always an approval. There's something. Right? There's a governance in place to slow these things down rationally and reasonably, but slowing these things down. So now I have this innovation on a daily basis, new models on a monthly basis, new technology tools on a quarterly basis. And it's happening so fast I can't even consume it, let alone deal with the change of it. So now I have a multi-part problem. Part number one, it is a academically complex topic. Part number two, changes so frequently it's hard to even consume. And then part number three, it's hard for me to appreciate the use cases that have the biggest bang for the buck. So the very first thing I need to do is a CIO, even on behalf of the executive team, is education, right? How do I get everybody to understand what words mean? And then if I get over that hump, then I get to say, well, am I ready to implement some of the things I want to be able to do? Then if you get over that, what are the use cases? What of the 500 interesting ideas I have, what are the three that will actually create value for my organization? Which is not an easy adventure.
Well, I like where you started with this. You talked about using the right words. You talked about redefining those words, almost rebuilding the lexicon. Can you put a little more substance behind that? I mean, what are some of the words that are being misused or misinterpreted that are so pivotal to this next era?
Well, it's easy to misinterpret the definition of AI to be anything automation, right? It's easy to look at it as a broad spectrum of everything from IT automation to simple services all the way to agentic AI or somewhere in between. It's also easy to misinterpret uh, algorithms as something other than machine learning, right? It's AI by definition is a combination of both machines and models, right? Models are the algorithms. The algorithms are machine learning. Under a type of machine learning is deep learning. A type of deep learning is enforcer learning, right? It's all types of machine learning. So once you sort of get over the hump of these things are just mathematical algorithms that you need to apply, then you start to say, what is an LLM? What's it good for? What it's not good for? Using terms like non-deterministic, right? I wouldn't use an LLM to do a credit score as an example, because you always want that score to be accurate, correct, and the same every time I ask the question, right? Versus it might be perfectly appropriate to answer non-deterministically for future focus, like what's my strategy in China? right? Those are perfectly
Mhm.
fine. So there's a new nomenclature because there's a new academics, and resetting the table of what words mean is kind of the first step.
Okay, so it sounds like the role of the CIO CTO is kind of increasingly also as much about educating the organization and setting the path as it is keeping things running. Good thing we all implemented our agile pipelines years ago, so we're all now ready to implement the kind of change that you were talking about. I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but let's talk about the skills then.
Yeah.
So we talked about you know AI and data fluency. But what about the skill set? I mean, what are you seeing in the emerging era of the CIO CTOs, the ones that are really sort of hitting it out of the park? What are some of the things you're seeing that are really making you think, hey, you know what? If I was building a persona for this role, these would be some of the most important skills I'd be looking for.
Let's talk about the mistakes first because it leads into the skill sets they require. So mistake number one, thinking that an AI problem equals a data problem, right? In fact, one of the bigger mistakes that a CIO made in the last 18 months is giving an AI project or discipline or team to under the CDO, right? Because you think all AI needs data, therefore it's a data related problem, when reality is AI is a software engineering problem, right? I can't just expose data and have AI answer a question. I need to create constraints. Is this an appropriate question to ask and an appropriate answer to give? Right, that's a software engineering exercise. So error number one is giving it to the wrong team, right? And therefore, the skill set I need is a software engineering team. In many ways, a AI engineering team or a machine learning engineering team. I need a team that says, how do I acquire data, use data, create embeddings of data, use a vectorized database of data so that I can answer an AI question, right? Produce LLM inputs and LLM outputs. So that's the first one. Another problem that they've made is picking a customer experience use case, right, versus an internal IT use case. It's always better to master, we'll call AI for IT ops before you do, replace a living human being in an interaction with an actual customer,
Hmm.
because for the exact same reason that those answers have to be right. Right, when I'm interfacing with a customer, the answer has to be seven. It can't sometimes be seven, sometimes be eight, sometimes be nine. Right. So like
Well,
that
just
becomes
just
the
I want
right.
to I want to jump in there. So, I mean, look, we've talked about chatbots, and chatbots are one of the most well-regarded aspects of what people think is a good AI use case. But how often should a chatbot answer be seven? I mean, are you saying this isn't necessarily a great use case, or it depends?
I'm saying it's a great use case for asking the question. It may not, in fact, be a great use case for answering the question, right? So,
Mm,
natural language understanding, do I really mean what I'm asking for, is great because then I can take a dictionary of what's possible in my business and say, here are the 15 different ways to ask the same thing so I can narrow the answer. But the answer
mm,
still always has to be seven because it's non deterministic. If the LLM produces six, I have to stop, replace the six with a seven because I might actually have regulatory boundaries, right? It has to be seven because there's a law that requires it to do so, or a contractual requirement to be accurate, or simply I don't want the reputational risk. I don't want to tell an airline baggage customer that in fact they perfectly fine with 100 kilograms, right? When in fact it's only 50, right? Because then
yeah,
it'll be a nightmare customer experience after the fact. So the non-deterministic point of view creates how important and how accurate does this answer need to be. In fact, the most so there's two valuable sort of use case patterns. Use case pattern number one is more people productivity, right? Where I'm asking an HR question, getting an HR answer, right? It's a discrete, simple set of commands. The other pattern, a process automation pattern, is much more like receive, physical document or digitized document, use vision to find those 10 fields, contextualize those fields, right? Is this a real customer? Is this a real address? And then insert that record into system. That AI-based agentic pattern is and has been the highest ROI so far.
interesting. So, I mean, it feels to me like if we think of the old business architects of yesteryear in terms of you have a problem, you're going to bring me the problem. and now I have to think about how to dissect that problem. And AI might be part of the solution, but isn't necessarily the solution. Um, it sounds like that kind of architecture skill of how to take business logic and how to take data logic and how to take potentially data assets and figure out how to put them together is kind of the primary role here. Am I getting that right?
It's 100%. In fact, every single, let's say, conversation workshop I would do, we would discover 400 use cases. And every single time, it's almost exact math. 350 of those amazing ideas are analytics, right? It's
Mm,
the list that dot dot dot. It's like, okay, well, that's clearly not AI. However, I perceive you have a problem that you want solved. Good news is we have other technology to solve that. Of the remaining 50, 30 of them are out of the box machine learning, right? Segmentation, classification. Let's use out of the box. Let's be better predictive sort of response in your answers. Of the last 20, 15 of them they can't afford, right? These are multi-million dollars data that's outside of their environment. A complex agentic model that requires third-party sources. It's just not something that's feasible to implement, or at least nobody's going to give you the money to support that. But then the
mm,
last five, that's kind of the magic five, right? The five that you have data for, you have a little bit of skill set on, that it's an obvious problem you could solve, but more importantly, that it's a velocity problem, not a volume problem. In other words, the goal isn't to uh, do lots of things. The goal is to do that one thing quickly. And
yeah.
if you
Mm.
find that velocity edge, that's going to be the biggest bang for your buck.
Okay, so I think I'm following where you're going in terms of what kind of skills we need. Um, let's talk about these roles, though: CIO, CTO, CDO, Chief Digital Officer, Chief AI Officer, Chief Analytics Officer. What are you seeing? Where's the standardization? Where's the hierarchy headed?
That is a complex answer. It time and time again, I see it all over the place. It is very rare that I'd walk into an organization that there's clarity on who the boss is, right? Sometimes it's the CTO. CTO being the OT and IT responsible person, right? They deal with the inside internal systems. They also deal with the physical creation of train based data. Or it's a CIO who's the head, who's responsible for all of technology, but has a business acumen. Um, and then sometimes the CISO is a peer in many ways to the CIO because they have a different, potentially even equal budget to the CIO themselves. What
Hmm.
is most clear to me is that there's now a pretty significant gap between the CXO, the technology leadership roles, and the very next level, because the CXO roles, those technology executives, have spent so much of their daily, weekly time as peers to the COO, the CFO, the CMO, the COO, that and haven't brought along their VPs. That their VPs have been responsible for the technology, but haven't been involved in the business discussions, and therefore the succession that used to be 2 years long is now 5 years long, and
Huh.
that's effectively changing the lifespan of a CIO from 36 months to 48 months, just to keep up. And it's
Wow.
because we've been incremental to those roles. We haven't taken anything away. We've just added more work, more responsibility, more accountability to them.
Hmm. So let's talk a little bit about if we go to the modern playbook now. So, Paul, you're the owner and manager of a big company, and you're looking to bring these roles in, and you're consulting yourself, which is an interesting proposition in and of itself. But you're consulting yourself on kind of where do you focus these individuals? And so let's just talk about mindset, measurement, culture. What are you looking for as you bring, let's just say, C-level IT leaders into the organization?
I need somebody who has a um, incredibly capable understanding to both understand and model a business, right? Business model framework. They need to know how we make money, how we spend money, what our value proposition is, who our customer segments are, what our key assets are, but not just understand the current state, but to appreciate the organizational strategy over the next 5 years. what is going to be different? Am I going to attract new customers? Am I going to go to a new geography? Am I going to build another product? Am I going to triple my revenue? Am I going to halve my expense? Because that makes a very significant impact on the technology platforms that are made available. It's quite possible that the platforms you have right now can't support the growth in any of those dimensions. So if you don't have a mastery of those dimensions, you won't know what the actual net impact is. In other words, you might make a poor decision. Like, it's quite possible that you need to move from an on-premise ERP to a SaaS-based ERP because of the growth, but it's just as true to not do that. It's just as true to say, well, sovereignty is important in this new growth pattern because I want to go into a geography that sovereignty becomes important, and therefore I need the command of control and sitting in a data center that I manage. But if you don't have the business appreciation, you're going to go all in on this SaaS product, which simply is a failure on your part, right? So having the business acumen to appreciate what change means as applied to technology is the most important skill set.
Yeah, and probably a difficult one to get. So let me round out our conversation today with a question that I'm going to start this week with the new kind of firming question. So you'll be my guinea pig for this segment.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to call it lessons to my 22-year-old self. So you've had an established career, you've been around the block quite a bit, you've had various roles in various places. If there was one piece of advice you would give the 22-year-old Paul Lewis, what would it be?
Absolutely stop experimenting with leadership skills. I made the mistake in my early leadership skills of trying a bunch of things to see if it would work, right?
Hmm.
And I discovered deep into my career that having high transparency and high empowerment was sort of the secret sauce for leadership success. Had I known that in my management and director career, I probably would have had more satisfied, um, people who work for me. So that's definitely what I would push.
So find your ethos and stick to it. Don't don't riff just to see if something works, and confuse your team that you're one way one month and another way another month, and depending on what book you read,
Right.
your management style is dramatically shifted.
Your team
Uh,
hates it. Yeah, 100% true.
well, being a parent of three children, my kids also expect me to be the same dad.
Right.
Whatever they view that dad to be, they expect that to be the same dad.
Right.
Um, Paul, look, we could unpack so much of what we discussed today, but I sincerely appreciate all of your insight. Where can people reach you?
You can always reach me at Paul Lewis CTO in whatever socials make sense for you. But I'm around. I'm happy to talk at all times.
Great. Well, wishing you nothing but the best of success. And for all of our listeners, thank you very much for joining. For Paul Lewis, this is Beyond the High Tea Headlines, and thank you very much for joining. We'll talk to you all soon.